Hi, I'm Larry Taylor, and this is part 5 of a series that I'm calling The Journey. Life is all about learning to love God, nature, others, and ourselves. And learning to love ourselves, at least for me, is one of the hardest parts of that. Um, and I'm starting here to lay the foundation as to why that's so hard for me. And perhaps it is for some of you as well. I talked about my father's background and my mother's background, the kind of home that I grew up in, lower middle class. Most of the kids in the neighborhood, their parents were um, blue collar working folks. Um, Baltimore was at that time very segregated, um, and our neighborhood was entirely white. That would soon change, um, thankfully. Uh, my parents were highly intellectual. They both worked in science. My mother was a laboratory technician in the Department of Anatomy at Johns Hopkins School of Hygiene. My father was a biological oceanographer at Johns Hopkins. And our home was a very formal, um, silverware that had to be polished. Dinner was at 6 p.m. every evening on the dot. Assigned places, tablecloth, good china, proper place settings, proper table manners were highly important in the family in which I grew up. Children generally, my sister and I, kept quiet until being addressed. Most of the dinner conversation was between my parents, and a lot of it, of course, as you might expect, had to do with their work. And because my mother was working in an area of medical research, a lot of the dinner talk was about diseases and sicknesses and vaccines, and the polio vaccine was just being developed. It had not yet been rolled out to the general public, and my sister and I were both signed up to be guinea pigs. So when it was rolled out to the public, I think back in those days, everyone got um, an initial shot and then 2 booster shots. I had 8 of those booster shots. So polio is one thing I'm pretty sure I'll never get. At any rate, um, from my earliest memories, I have been afraid, terrified of death, and just terrified, not knowing why. I think I know where some of that came from. I've always been emotionally a very sensitive person. I've always felt things very deeply, um, which is a gift but also a curse, depending on the circumstance. My very earliest memory is of being a very young child. I want to say infant. Uh, it's a memory which is strong, and yet even as I share it now, I think you're not supposed. Humans don't remember things that young. I don't know how young I was. I was still in a crib, um, so I could have been a year old. I'm not sure. But at any rate, I was placed in this sack, kind of like a baby sleeping bag. Those mummy bags, the kind that zip up all around you and you're in there. It was sort of like that. Um, and it had tethers, straps, cloth straps that were attached to it. I think there were 4. And as an adult, my mother described this to me, so I know this part is accurate. And those tethers were then tied to the rungs of the crib, and the idea was to prevent the baby from rolling over. For some reason, they didn't want babies to roll over. I do know that Benjamin Spock was the in thing back in those days. He was a pediatrician that published a book about parenting, and horrible book. Please don't ever parent this way. Basically, his recommendations for parents was that they put their infants on very strict schedules. Don't breastfeed, don't cuddle, don't hold, strict schedules, feeding time every 4 hours on the dot. And if the kid is crying in between, then the only thing you do is you check and see if the diaper needs to be changed. Other than that, you leave them alone. So my very earliest memory is being in this sack thing, tied in this crib, and crying and having a whole throat full of mucus. You know that feeling. And feeling like I was choking. Well, I was choking on the mucus, which produced a feeling of I'm dying, Now, for us as adults, of course, you get that feeling, you sit up and you cough it up. Here I am, little guy, little infant, strapped down, can't roll over, can't get up, can't sit up, and feeling like I'm choking, and I'm sobbing, I'm screaming, because I'm terrified of dying. And here's my earliest memory. The room is dark, the door opens, a sense of relief briefly comes over me. My mother walks in with kind of a fake sort of smile on her face, and reaches down and says, you're not wet, you don't need changed, it's not feeding time, you're fine. And out she goes, shuts the door, and leaves me there choking and screaming for God knows how long. That's my very earliest memory. Fast forward a couple of years ahead of time, I'm now preschooler, I'm a toddler, I'm in my own bed, in my own bedroom, and I'm having what I now know are panic attacks. I was just terrified, and I must have been crying out. My mother comes in, asks me what's wrong. Same kind of forced smile, same kind of sing-songy sort of voice. And I, with as much vulnerability as a toddler can have, I respond, I'm afraid to die. And I remember this very clearly. She says, oh, well, everybody has to die. And she leaves and shuts the door. That's my second oldest memory. My third oldest memory is, which probably happened somewhere around the same time. I was a preschooler, obviously, and was in the living room. I have no idea what happened, but I remember being angry and throwing a toy or something across the room. And my mother, with a look of disdain upon her face, I remember this like it was yesterday. She said, her eyes drilled into me, and she said, Larry, people in their right minds don't get angry. I got that message. The message is that if you get angry, you're insane. You must keep anger inside. You must never let it show. I got the message very, very clearly that life is a scary, scary, scary thing that ends in this horrible thing called death. And along the way, there's all these miserable diseases like polio and such, and and but don't talk about it. Stuff it, keep it in. And of course, my father taught me by example to stuff all your feelings, to never let them out, especially those feelings that were considered to be negative. I don't believe there are any such things as negative feelings. I don't think feelings are right or wrong. They just are. And what you do with a feeling may be right or wrong. You know, there's nothing wrong with being angry. There is something wrong with punching another person in the nose. But I got those messages very, very clearly. And as a result, I withdrew into a world of fantasy. I was alone most of the, more time than I wasn't. I did have friends, and I did go out and play on a regular basis. And like boys of that age and time, we played army in the woods, and we played stickball in the alley out back, and we rode bikes up and down the alley, and there were all those times, and those were good times. But there was an inordinate amount of time when I was alone. Those times, I think, mostly must have been while my mother was at work, before I was old enough to go to school, and after I went to school. After I got home, I would walk to school and walk back from school, and I had a key that hung around my belt, and I would let myself in. And my grandmother was there. Would have been down in the basement. I can't remember. She may have come up to fix me lunch. I'm not sure about that. She would occasionally interact with me, and she was nice when she did. But most of the time I was alone. And I would spend hours and hours and hours listening to records. I had a whole stack of 45 records. Sink the Bismarck, and I don't know, The Legend of Daniel Boone, and Davy Crockett, those kind of things. And had this whole stack of records. And a record. My father had this stereo system, and you could pile up the records, and they would drop down and play one at a time. These 45. So for hours, I would put on these records, and I would walk in circles, daydreaming, deep, deep into daydreams that would go on and on and on. I don't remember what those daydreams were about. I think that they always, I'm guessing that most of the time, at least, they involved me as the central character and me as a hero of some sort. But hours and hours just listening to records. Even when the family was home, and I was a preschooler, I would march around when there was music. I remember one time when it was Christmas time, because we had a little Christmas tree that was set up in a bay window with all the lights on and star on top. And I remember as a little toddler standing mesmerized, just staring at those lights, especially the star, marching to some music that was playing. And it was really in a hypnotic state. That was the life that I lived as a little boy. That changed a little bit for the better when my dad took a summer job teaching marine ecology on Cape Cod. And I'll tell you about that in our next video.